Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to SBC's How Sports Betting Fits into the Tribal Gaming Ecosystem. This afternoon, we do have a set of really good panelists, and it's a rather large panel, so I'm going to introduce them rather quickly so that we don't take a whole lot of time of our session here just on bios, because you can read those on the speaker bios. So with us, we have Brian Wyman. He is a partner and senior vice president of operations and data analytics at the Innovation Group. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Sheila. Thanks for having me.
Vic, I'm going to do this again. Trista, senior director of business development at IGT Play Sports. Hey, Vic.
Hey, close enough. Thanks, Sheila.
Yeah, sorry about that. I do it every single time. Marcus Yoder, he is Senior Vice President of Sales for GAN, Game Account Network.
Hi, everybody.
Welcome, Marcus.
Thank you, Sheila.
Conrad Granito, who is the General Manager for Muckleshoot Indian Casino. Welcome, Conrad. And also Jonathan Chowdhury. He is a partner with Quarles and Brady in Washington, D.C. So now that everybody has been introduced, let's start off with our first question. And this is going to be a free-flowing panel. So for those of you who are watching, please use the Q&A section so you can get us your questions. We'll try to reserve some time to answer them at the end of our panel.
Now we've got that.
Why what was that?
I don't know.
Make it exciting.
Okay, well, that was a nice intro for us today.
That was a powerful introduction, Sheila.
Yeah, way to go.
We try. Lucy's telling us, please don't press any buttons.
I'm not pressing anything.
Exclamation mark to that.
Right, exactly. Okay, so guys, with tribal gaming in 28 states and state jurisdictions, what are the sports betting options available to tribes?
Well,
I'm happy to.
Yeah, go ahead, Marcus.
Well, I think one of the things,
Marcus.
Taking a look at what kind of a framework to consider this, and I think this can help guide our discussion. So you've got the regulatory framework in terms of, what is actually allowed. Is sportsbook allowed at all? Is it only within the land-based casino? Is it on-premise mobile? Or is it mobile potentially on complete tribal lands? Or is it statewide, right? So that's one way to start to think about it. And then you have to look at the commercial side of it, which is, can you enter into the market with a full market access deal like DraftKings or with something like FanDuel? Is there an opportunity for a joint venture, a creation of a new entity underneath the tribal business structure? So therefore, it's still tribal, but it actually becomes a joint venture with part ownership from a partner. And then are there just simple operating partnerships and having service providers like IGT, GAN as examples, just simply providing service into the operating company that would be set up. So I think if we start there, then we've got some structure to talk about.
Great. Vic?
Yeah, no, Marcus absolutely captured everything. And I think for a tribe to really start evaluating what works best, right, there's pros and cons behind every single thing. B2B supplier deal, there's pros and cons there. In terms of completely outsourcing to a DraftKings or FanDuel, there's pros and cons behind that as well. So when evaluating the type of model to move forward with, it's important, I believe, the tribe to really educate and understand how does each model work from a commercial standpoint and what are the pros and cons. And I'm sure maybe some of my panelists would be able to dive into those a little bit.
So Brian, what are your thoughts on that part?
Well, I think Marcus laid out the options from a paper and commercial deal with a partner perspective. But I think for tribes, the conversation needs to start long before they're deciding what type of deal they want to paper. They need to be involved. And I think I was on a panel with Jonadab a couple of years ago, and I believe it was Jonadab who said, now's a time for advocacy. Was kind of the message of that he presented, and I think that's right. And the time for advocacy was 2 years ago, but if we've missed that, it's certainly now. And I think tribes need to be involved in their state's process of determining not only a legislative framework, but a regulatory framework, and working with the ground rules. Then you can start to make the decision of what's best for your tribe. But I really think that, at the outset, we need to figure out, again, what are the ground rules that we're actually playing against and evaluating against? Because in some situations, you might be better off with a B2C deal, and in other situations, you might be better off with a B2B deal. And obviously, we can talk more about that decision on an individual scenario, But I think there's no right answer for every single tribe, and really they need to understand their own competitive landscape in order to make that decision, as well as the deals being offered. And frankly, there are some deals that I've been exposed to where 90% of net revenue is flowing to the partner, and that's going to be problematic from from the tribe's perspective, of course, unless they're viewing it strictly as an amenity, but also from a statewide perspective, and thinking about all of that, all of those entertainment dollars flowing out of state now rather than in state, where they fund jobs and things like that. So it's not strictly a tax revenue question for the state. And so I think all of these things need to come together as tribes start to evaluate what the right setup is. But the options are myriad, as Marcus laid out.
Conrad, what were your options? What were your options when you were looking at sports betting options for your facility in your state?
We're actually still in that process. I mean, Brian's point is well taken. We're still, two groups of tribes have actually started or in negotiations, and as a number of tribes are, and we're working through what those compact negotiations, which then, of course, how it's going to be operated, how is it going to be fees and taxes, what is the operator going to pay, integrity fees. It's all over the map. And, here in Washington, we're actually kind of frustrated because we thought we'd be, it got passed in March, signed by the governor, and, moved ahead. And we thought we'd have, compacts done before football season. And now we might not even see it till next football season. But, Brian's point is well taken, because we, of course, as every tribal jurisdiction is looking at it, had a parade of vendors, with all the names and even some no names. But it's hard to cut the deal not knowing how the structure is going to be within your specific state. And it might be better as a B2B or a B2C type of venture. And, you then have to, of course, put in how much risk you want to take, because as we all know, sports betting is, there's risk involved. Do you want to take that as the operator, or do you want to put that onto your partner and let them do it? Of course, there's a fee for that. So again, those are the challenges that we're running here in Washington. And I know other tribes will run into the same ones, depending on where their compact is going to, end up.
Yeah, good points. Jonathan, I'm going to ask you to put on your former hat as NIGC. Brian brought up a really good point of some of those contracts coming in on really high partner rates. Where do you see that fitting into regulation at this point?
Absolutely. And I just wanted to say briefly, thank you for this opportunity, Sheila. It's always an honor to join you. It's always an honor to participate with SBC, and I just love this chance to join this very esteemed panel. So I understand a lot of the folks in the audience probably aren't that familiar with gaming in the U.S. in general, as well as gaming in Indian country. And the first thing folks have to keep in mind is that Indian gaming is governmental gaming. It's the point of Indian gaming is to fuel strong tribal governments, and gaming operates in a state-by-state arena in the U.S. so that the gaming compacts that have been touched on by others already really define the scope of gaming that's allowed in what's known as Class 3. And sports betting is Class 3 gaming, and so in order to have sports betting on any tribal lands, you have to operate under an existing compact. So as vendors reach out to tribal nations, please be sensitive of the political dynamics involved for any tribal operation, and look for opportunities to work with state governments and in some cases the federal government to get the necessary approvals that are required. Now, in terms of the necessary approvals, that brings us to this B2C idea and everything that Brian and Vic and Marcus covered, as well as Conrad. So one thing I really want to point out in terms of my former NIGC role is that the National Indian Gaming Commission does play an important role in determining whether or not agreements with vendors are management agreements or not. And so whenever you're looking at a potential sports betting arrangement, you have to a given tribe has to decide whether or not it wants to operate sports betting, independently or work with an operator to basically, come in and manage the sports book. Now, how that is done is very critical. If it's done the wrong way, you could end up running under what's known as a management agreement that hasn't been approved by the NIGC. And that brings with it all sorts of penalties and all sorts of problems. But if you do it properly and work with the NIGC early on, you can either make sure that if you want a management agreement, that it passes muster for the federal agency. But if you don't want a management agreement, you structure it in a way that it's clear that the tribe maintains management authority over the sports book. And that's critical because under federal law, a tribe and only a tribe can be the primary regulator as well as the sole proprietor of its operations. The only exception to that is an approved management agreement. So if you and I've actually seen this happen in one circumstance. I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but there was an engagement with a vendor that went very far down the line, and it was an afterthought that folks reached out to NIGC, and they had to go back to formula and start from scratch in terms of redefining their contractual relationship to pass muster. So the best advice I can give is reach out to NIGC early. They're happy to work with folks through their general counsel office and provide advice and feedback on whether or not an agreement is a management agreement or whether or not it passes muster as just an ancillary contract. Hopefully that's helpful.
That's great. Thanks. Because that's real important, is making sure that you pass the muster with the Fed so that you don't have to go back to square one, as John had said. So, Marcus, let's start with back with you again. Where do you see, what stages are you seeing the states in at this point? Some of them are already offering sports books, some of them are in their process. And who do you see jumping on the bandwagon this coming year?
Well, we've got a number. I think one of the most important things that is happening is Michigan is actually coming online, and from recent information that we've received, that is going to be happening this month, right? I think the entire market has a lot of expectation for Michigan to jump right in there in terms of revenue levels to Pennsylvania and New Jersey. We've also seen some other legislation, for instance, in Ohio, things were moving forward very rapidly there. And then that has seemed to have fizzled a bit. Obviously, that's not relevant to a tribal opportunity. So when looking at the newest opportunities out in Arizona, New Mexico, with the tribes discussing, and also then the horsemen putting forward that they would like to see that happen. Okay, how's that going to balance out? I don't think we'll see any new legislation, obviously, by the end of the year, but coming into new legislative processes beginning in January and February, I think we will see significant movement. Obviously, all eyes are on California, right, as the major prize that is out there. I think we have probably one of the best opportunities that we've seen probably in about 10 years for new gaming legislation to move forward. You know, back across the past 10 years, we've had, I think, 4 different bills to get California-wide poker put forward, and that didn't work. This may be the way that we actually move forward in California with some form of online gaming, probably just sportsbook and maybe later iCasino. But I think the prospects for California and online statewide sports betting is good.
Vic, where do you see things at?
Yeah, so number one, before getting into the states, it's really exciting for me when I see states, you know, a year or 2 years before legalization. However, seeing a lot of tribal regulators getting involved in the various educational sessions and so forth, and really spending the time to learn. And so in many states, as we've seen, for instance, right, the state necessarily hasn't launched or passed legislation, compacts that don't necessarily state sports betting is not allowed, right? And so in Oregon, we've seen this as well, where a couple tribes had compacts that allowed them to move forward, and some of the other tribes are starting to work on their compacts as well. And so it's pretty exciting in terms of, you know, Indian gaming and tribes launching with sports betting without the states necessarily passing legislation. So, for instance, we're seeing in Wyoming, right, with Rin River trying to do something similar. And so I think when we evaluate just from a legislation perspective, we have to keep in mind that there are the compacts, it is very intricate. There's much more to it. So in terms of some states that we're definitely excited for, Washington State, of course, Louisiana, as well as let's say Virginia, with some of the tribes there getting a casino, you know, license that may launch in 2022. But there's a lot of excitement around all of the states that have tribal gaming. I'm excited to see it grow. And Marcus made a good point with Michigan, where it's really setting a nice precedent in terms of the tribes being able to offer statewide iGaming as well as sports betting, and that's going to drive a lot of additional revenue stream and so forth. So I'm super excited to see what the future is going to hold in tribal gaming.
Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I think Marcus and Vic sort of hit it on the head with the jurisdictions that are of most interest right now. From a tribal gaming perspective, the one that I am obviously looking at the hardest is California. And that's fascinating for a number of reasons, not even just the revenue potential, which is, I mean, out of this world in terms of you know, the figures on it. But let's take a step back and you know, to my point before, like, let's think about regulation. Let's think about legislation. You've got, oh boy, something like 60 tribal entities that have casinos in California. I mean, it's just a massive number. And I mean, I'm thinking down my vendor list right now and trying to get to 60, and I'm not going to do it. So it's going to be a really interesting landscape of what the deals look like that are cut between the tribes and the vendors, and vendors with deals with multiple tribes. And what if it's a mobile environment? What if it's not a mobile environment? What if the regulation, you know, delays mobile for a couple of years, or does something like Illinois did and forces all the brands to be underneath, you know, the umbrella of the casino company, i.e. you can't just have, and I'm going to use DraftKings as an example here, but it could be anybody. You just can't have a DraftKings sportsbook out there. It has to be, you know, like Casino Queen in Illinois has the you know, DraftKings by Casino Queen sportsbook. You know, I think right now California is in such an early stage, despite the fact that we've been talking about them for you know, forever. We can look at the bill that was put forward last year, which ultimately you know, didn't get across the line. But I think there's going to be a lot of parties whose thinking has evolved in terms of what the legislative landscape and the regulatory landscape should look like there. And I think there's going to be an awful lot of trying to bring everybody together to actually get a bill that has support from the commercial community, who's going to lobby really hard for their angle, but also the tribal community. And I think the tribal community needs to be, at this point in time, thinking very hard about what they actually want to achieve in California with the legislation. And then, I know this is a bit of foreshadowing, but the iGaming word has come up a little bit, and I think we'll have maybe the opportunity to discuss that later. But I think these are all one conversation that's happening in bits and pieces right now, but it needs to happen in a more cohesive way, particularly in the tribal community out there.
Just a quick caveat there. It will be interesting to see, like in any other state with tribal gaming, if they will do what Michigan did at a pretty late stage, which is saying in any representation of this offering, the logo of the tribe or the logo of the tribal community has to be the same size, if not larger, than the actual brand that's put out there. So if you go to a DraftKings site or brand X, you will see representation of the tribe at the same size as representation of what the actual brand is. Frankly, I think it's a great move. I think that keeps the playing community that much more cognizant of really who they're playing with, even though, if it's DraftKings or any brand. But I think that additionally from a tribal sovereignty standpoint, I think that's a very necessary step, and I hope to see that other states do that.
And Marcus, one of the things that I look at to my earlier comment about there being so many tribes, many of which are quite small in comparison to some of the bigger names that all of us would recognize, potentially even those that are abroad, but certainly those that are out of California. And, in a fully open mobile sports betting environment, I wonder if, we're going to see the very small operators having the same opportunities as the very large operators. Whether that overall is a benefit for the tribal community at large, or whether that really would benefit the out-of-state, nationwide, or even global operators more than it would actually benefit the tribes. And seeing how the tribes come together to, first of all, understand what that landscape looks like, and then second of all, craft a solution that works for everybody, big tribes, small tribes, together. I think this is just a really fascinating time for the California environment.
Agreed.
Yep. Conrad, they're talking about small tribes, big tribes, mobile. What are the things that you're looking at specifically in Washington?
Well, it's interesting to hear all that, because right now it's all on the table. Now, we do not have mobile off premises as part of our, the compact, the law that passed or authorized only tribal casinos. It is a brick and mortar situation. We can have mobile on property, and we're clearly looking at that. But we're also having conversations with some of the smaller tribes who maybe really don't want to get into a full-blown DraftKings or FanDuel or William Hill, and where we might be, for lack of a better term, the main point, and then send the signal and the information, say, out to the smaller tribes out on the Olympic Peninsula or whatever. So, a lot of different things are on the table. And, as Brian and Marcus had said, it's going to have to fit every single tribe. But, the iGaming is not, into Washington, because we're the only state that has a state law that says you're committing a felony if you, go online. I see, watch Sunday Night Football or whatever, and I want to take Terry Bradshaw's money, and I can't log in from Washington and do it because it recognizes that I'm here, and I can't even do it for free. So, but I think, you're looking at those modalities, and, we're going to try and take advantage of every one we can. So,
you and Arizona are in the same boat. Jonathan, what do you see as some obstacles? Having it having something that works for everybody is almost unrealistic when you look at the tribal landscape in the United States. What do you see as some options for that?
Well, thanks, Sheila. I think we're looking at the evolution of gaming, and this goes beyond sports betting right now. I always make the point that, while folks talk about sports betting and iGaming or mobile gaming in the same breath, these are distinct ideas. I mean, iGaming, mobile gaming, these are delivery mechanisms that are separate and distinct from the actual game that's being played. And there's nothing about sports betting per se that lends itself to iGaming or mobile gaming uniquely. And so in other words, if you legalize the ability to bet off of tribal lands, you can do that for any number of games beyond sports betting. So and we've seen this in this pandemic moment that we're in, as operators are looking at ways to provide value to their customer base, especially given, current sensitivities, understandable sensitivities about in-person play. We have to be looking at using some of these emerging technologies to deliver that customer experience. And hopefully state regulators and state legislators would support Indian country's efforts to deliver that customer experience. Now, a couple things to keep in mind, and you mentioned challenges. Now, we can't take our eye off of the ball with potential federal legislation as well. So, obviously, Congress has been focused on, CARES Act considerations, HEROES Act considerations, COVID relief, and that's pretty much dominated congressional discussions over the last, several months. But with the new administration and as things settle down, there's always the potential for renewed discussions regarding large-scale federal regulation of sports betting that Indian country needs to watch very, very carefully, because the various sports leagues have a lot of skin in that game and will certainly be making their arguments to Congress, one way or the other, should those discussions develop. And Indian country needs to make sure that whatever approach or lack of approach Congress takes, and there are many folks who say the best thing for Congress to do is nothing in terms of sports betting. Whatever happens, the foundational policy supporting Indian gaming isn't lost in the mix. Indian gaming isn't commercial gaming. It shouldn't be looked at as simply, how to develop revenue bases for states. You need to look at the benefits to tribes as well as non-Indian communities that come from Indian gaming and incorporate that into these discussions. So the challenges are as we discussed, how to take advantage of changing customer tastes in this new environment, how to take advantage of emerging technological trends, and how to do it in a way that, you're able to successfully navigate state law changes and federal law changes. And it requires vigilance. As Brian mentioned, yes, it's still a time to advocate. And it's a time to advocate with all these state legislatures and do it in a way that highlights the benefits to non-Indians that go beyond revenue sharing or tax bases. We've been a broken record, the folks on this call, about highlighting the job creation, the services, the recycling effect of dollars staying home from Indian gaming. That needs to be hit hard as states look at changing their regulatory approaches.
You brought up an interesting concept. With all the states that have been already passing sports betting legislation, what's the point of the federal government getting into it now? I mean, it sounds like an interesting thought, but don't you think it would have been better that they got into it earlier rather than now and trying to fit everybody under the same sort of umbrella now that everybody, so many states have gone already and passed this legislation?
Yeah.
We'll go with you, Jonathan, first.
Yeah, and I don't want to take too much time on this because I'm sensitive to how much time we have, but the push for integrity fees has been, I think, tied to, we still haven't seen the numbers. We don't have enough data under our belt to really assess the economic impact of sports betting. I mean, I think we all intuitively understand its value as an amenity, but as a standalone business, we don't have the data, and a lot of the estimates have been based on handle, and those estimates have been, very large. And so this push for, getting a piece of that in the form of integrity fees has driven some of the policy discussions. Now that hasn't gotten much traction yet in Congress. And certainly there's a lot of pressure from certain sports communities, the sports industry, not to have a federal legislative approach to any of this and to keep it a state-by-state model. But the concern is based on what I view as inflated economic projections of this business model. This push for integrity fees is concerning. You're dealing with the smallest of margins to begin with, and people are going to be trying to shave off for their interests, things in the form of integrity fees, and we've seen in Oklahoma. The states have, fortunately, the tribes just won major litigation relating to their compacts in Oklahoma. But before that happened, you saw the rumblings from the governor suggesting that if sports betting is to be considered in Oklahoma, we need to reevaluate how much revenue sharing there is. And I think that's a backwards way of looking at the benefits to states and non-Indian communities. If you're solely looking at revenue sharing amounts, you're missing the big picture of job creation and the recycling effect of dollars to the community. And so, not to ramble too much, but this integrity fees angle has raised its head in policy discussions, and that's something that I think we're all familiar with and aware of. We just need to be vigilant.
Yeah,
Marcus, where do you see federal legislation?
Well, I don't see it coming in at all. First of all, there are just so many other issues that the federal government has to take care of before trying to focus on this problem or this opportunity, I should say. And realistically, the only reason why to enact anything from a legal perspective would be poker, right? Because liquidity is what's important. So I don't really see much involvement from the federal government, at least from the actual governmental. I'm sorry, not NIGC, but the actual U.S. federal government. I did want to bring up one interesting point that I just read, that in Pennsylvania, the promotional spending by the operators has been so rampant that on $463 million in handle in September, Pennsylvania netted just $390,000 in taxes, right? So there's another aspect. There's this market dynamic of everybody basically outbidding each other to get that new player. All this promotional spending basically is deducted from gross gaming revenue down to net gaming revenue, and then net gaming revenue is what is taxed, right? I'm definitely not saying that GGR should be taxed because that would just destroy everything. But if that's an effect that states and policymakers need to take a look at in terms of how are you getting down to the number that is going to be actually taxed.
Vic, where do you see this going at this point?
From a federal standpoint, I agree with Marcus. What's really interesting to me is what we're seeing in certain markets, such as in Michigan, right, where some of the tribes, even though they're statewide gaming from an iGaming and sports betting perspective, some of the tribes are pushing that if the gaming takes place within the reservation, the taxation wouldn't necessarily be the same, right? And we're seeing this argument in Colorado as well. And so I think that's going to be more and more prevalent in terms of how do the tribes get as much possible while still being able to compete with the commercials and do the same thing. And so to me, that's definitely a key area to pay attention to is how is the taxation going to work on and off if there is statewide gaming allowed. So to me, that's where I have my my attention on right now, more so than anything.
Good. Brian, where do you see federal legislation on the horizon at all?
I don't. And I mean, it's the same comment that Mark has made. Look, if there's federal legislation coming, my guess is that it's pushed by the leagues and it's around integrity fees or data fees. And look, I can be a little bit less polite than some of my colleagues on the panel that are in governmental discussions. And I mean, look, the integrity fee conversation is bunk. This is a revenue grab by the leagues. Integrity is, if anything, assisted by having regulated betting and not having just offshore betting by syndicates and so on. It's a good thing to have the data circulating throughout the community, and the fact that there are examples in the past of match fixing and things like that have happened that have been identified by virtue of there being betting shops putting this data out there. Tribes should fight integrity fees tooth and nail, whether they're coming at the state level or federal level, as should commercial operators. When it comes to data fees, I'm only modestly sympathetic to the angle of the leagues intellectual property and all that, and that's already been discussed by the courts, and the leagues really don't have, I don't think, a leg to stand on there. But at the end of the day, we do need to get the data from somewhere. And I don't really have a strong opinion on whether or not it needs to come from the leagues, but I do have a strong opinion that it needs to be priced at like a reasonable market price. And so if we can all agree on how to determine that, then whether it comes from the leagues or not, I don't think it's going to be a problem. Also, Marcus brought up a good point about promotional spend in Pennsylvania. I think there's a lot of ways that they can address that by capping the amount of promo spend that's tax deductible. But at the end of the day, the one thing that I don't want to get lost here, in case there are jurisdictions still considering this, Marcus's point that taxing handle is an absolutely terrible idea, has been proven in European jurisdictions. It's a disaster for operations, and to Jonadev's point about there already being thin margins, the fact is, if we're only holding 5 to 10% of the total handle, if you have something that's as seemingly innocuous as a 1% or 2% or 3% tax on handle, that's 10, 20, 30% or 20, 40, 60% of revenue at the end of the day. And having a 30 to 60% tax rate on an industry that, whose margins are from net revenue down to EBITDA are only like 25%, it isn't workable. It's a math problem. And, there's plenty of case study in Europe where, governments have done this and tried this, and it's failed spectacularly, both from a handle perspective where bettors are getting bad lines from the commercial operators, they just bet offshore, or the commercial operators just shut down and go elsewhere. I think that happened in a few places that I could point to. But in any case, all salient points, no federal regulation, I think, is coming. We have far bigger problems right now.
I agree. Conrad, are you having to deal with integrity fees in those conversations?
Unfortunately, it is one of the conversations that the state Washington is picking up. What they did prior to the negotiations starting, they had, I forget the individual, but literally go and look at every single sports legislation that's been approved in almost every state in different compacts. And we're getting this, like a potpourri type of thing. They're throwing almost everything in the pot, to look at. And, we're of the firm belief that, integrity fees, as Jonadev said, are not needed. And we're not wanting to have that as part of there. And whether the partner pays for it or the tribe pays for it, has been stated. The margins are so low on this that, why am I paying for something for basic public information anyway? So, it is there, but I don't think any tribe in Washington is going to agree to it.
Good to know. So let's take this out from sports betting and look at the bigger picture. How would you see, and we're going to go to Marcus first again, how would you see tribes setting things up so that they can easily move into esports, iGaming, and other opportunities now that they're in the negotiations for sports betting?
Well, this will be a little bit of self-serving here, but it's, it's by moving into, but there's validity to what I'm about to say. By establishing an online presence and digital engagement with your player now is the best way to move forward, right? And so businesses like ours and others do that. So, 7 years ago when I was with IGT and we brought out Double Down for our partners and implemented that 50 times, there was no branding. It wasn't associated. It was people playing Double Down on somebody else's website. Now you've got the ability for the players to actually be engaged with the brand from home for play for fun. And now we're actually introducing, others are as well, virtual sports betting. So in a state like California, Minnesota, Wisconsin, where you can't bet online, you can still engage in that activity. And frankly, if that keeps that player for 5 to 7 to 12 minutes longer on the site of the tribal casino, they're not doing something else, right? They're engaging with the brand. And it also gives or creates the experience for the tribal casino to understand how digital marketing is going to work beyond social media and email campaigns, right? We're kind of beyond that now. And then also if the casino can move forward with a platform that is expandable, that can actually handle real money gaming, then they don't have to start over when legislation actually hits. So there's the commercial side of it for GAN and what we do. But in reality, if I was a CIO or CMO or a CEO of a tribal casino, I would want to have that platform to move forward from whomever, so that I've got optionality when legalization, not if, when legalization takes place.
Vic?
Yeah, fully agree with Marcus. And so it starts with acquiring customers, building that database beyond just what they might have from a casino standpoint, right? And so when it comes to, let's say, esports, there's data feeds that can provide that via standard sports betting. And so very similar to what Marcus said, from an overall platform perspective, the ability to build a business, scale a business that's maybe starts with sports betting and eventually goes into iGaming is definitely important, right? Because when you have a seamless integration of a single platform that can do that, it allows for a lot more cross-promotional efforts to really drive retention and really drive as much revenue as possible. And so I believe that it's super important when evaluating various platform providers and so forth to think about what's the future going to look like more than just the next 5 years, but what's year 6 to year 10 going to look like? And does that platform, the technology provider, allow you to do that? It's definitely very important. And it's obviously goes along with the whole educational approach. Then the more you know, the more you can advocate and do what's best for the tribe at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think sorry, just to add on real quickly there, one of the things that I think the tribes and the tribal casinos can push for in their deals, even with a large market access opportunity, is the ownership of the player data, right? And specifically, they can link their player loyalty club to whatever offering is going to be online, because that's where the real value is in making sure that, there's another visit to the casino when we can finally all go back to these wonderful places. I love casinos. If there is a link to the land-based loyalty casino system that is part of whatever the online offering is, then you've got the ability to build that virtuous circle of, I'm going to play away from the physical casino and have a good time. And now I've got a reason, because I just built up more loyalty points, to go back to the casino to redeem them. Right. So I think that's something as tribes go into these negotiations, that ownership of data is going to be very important, and a stipulation that they can make a link between their loyalty system and the spending that's going to go online.
Important. Brian, what do you think about that?
Yeah, and look, I agree with Marcus entirely, but I think that there's a nuance here that Marcus is assuming, or that one might assume as they listen to Marcus talking, and that's that there's an identification between the brand of iCasino that I'm playing on as a player and the tribal casino underneath, right? Like what scares me about iCasino, and look, Marcus is exactly right. It's not if iGaming gets legislated down the road. It will happen. I don't know when. I'm not going to make a marketing. It's going to be 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, but it is coming at some point. It has to, and it may be something like the current pandemic that sets into gear, and it might be this pandemic that kicks it into gear as states are looking for alternate revenue sources. But the thing that scares me on behalf of tribes is what happens if we're not thoughtful today about how legislation, is put into place, and what happens in a few years when we do need a revenue grab and all of the B2C sports betting operators go, hey, I know that I'm just basically managing and I have a market access deal with your casino, but listen, I can just flip a switch and offer iCasino and you can get the same 10% or 20% of net revenue. Now, from a tribal sovereignty perspective, are we seeing these out-of-state operators come in, operate iGaming, and yeah, there's a piece of it that's going to some tribe, but are we really kind of offering this opportunity for tech companies to infringe on the ability to operate gaming in a unique way in the state? I think it's a real concern that tribes need to be mindful of today as we're advancing legislation that's pushing the boundary of iGaming as we introduce iSports betting.
Yeah, I know, Conrad, you've been in the business a long time, and you mentioned that Washington State, it's illegal to have internet gaming at this point. But are you looking that far ahead to when that is going to be available to you and picking your platforms accordingly?
I think, we're looking at it. We know that it's going to have to be a legislative, fix, which, in any state, especially this one's going to take a little while to do that. I know that from Muckleshoot's standpoint, it is one of the things we're looking at. It's not a high priority, but almost all the major companies that are offering sports betting and their payment mechanisms, either are currently operating online or come from online. So we're not too concerned that we're going to pick one that just doesn't fit that bill down the road, but it's not a priority that we're looking at. I would say the one thing we are looking at is that, number one, we own the data. It's our data, and that we have whatever usage, whether it's, hyperlinking to our site or to other, connections, and making sure that, if and when a relationship ends, that data stays with us and, is not with the vendor, or, that they're using it without our awareness and, to it. So that's a big thing more than, the internet side, is that the data stays with the property.
I couldn't agree more. That data is valuable, especially to the tribe, and shouldn't be let out. That's one of my biggest things.
Oh yeah, it's gold. It's gold.
It is. Jonathan, you work in a lot of jurisdictions. Do you see that sort of acceptance now going into an iGaming world?
Oh, yes and no. And let me just touch briefly about this federal legislation side of things. And maybe it's my pessimism or cynicism just living in D.C. and having to work on the Hill as often as I do. But I wouldn't dismiss the efforts to push for federal legislation out of turn. I mean, things are in a standstill right now. I mean, the pandemic is priority number one for Congress, but the same folks who pushed the draft legislation a couple of years ago still have the same interests at heart. Similarly, we can't minimize how much the changes in the administration may impact all gaming. And we saw what type of impact the DOJ had on its reinterpretation of the Wire Act in 2019, and frankly, the uncertainty that caused in many corners of the gaming world. There's going to be a reshuffling of the deck and the administration, and a new set of congressional priorities. And I don't mean to be Chicken Little. I'm just saying we just need to be vigilant on those pieces. Now, on a state-by-state basis, working with different tribes and California and elsewhere, I mean, one of the challenges is that we're dealing with an Indian gaming model that was written in 1988. IGRA was passed before folks had cell phones, let alone the internet and internet gaming. And IGRA was never intended, there's nothing in the congressional record to suggest that IGRA was intended to put tribes at a commercial disadvantage from commercial operators. Yet here we have the compacting process that requires tribes to kind of go through the state and go through a compact to have the opportunity to engage in internet gaming, and we're left with a practical challenge as tribes in providing offerings off of reservation lands. And again, the commercial industry isn't limited the way that we are, but we're even though tribal facilities are trying to expand beyond brick and mortar, we're left with this IGRA language that defines Indian gaming as gaming on Indian lands. So, we're handcuffed by that a little bit. As tribes are able to achieve some headway, such as in Michigan and elsewhere, to get legalization on the state level, it then becomes a first-to-market challenge. And as I've always pointed out, there's only one Amazon, there's only one eBay, usually because the people who are able to dominate the market, control the market early on. And as you open things up statewide, it remains to be seen how equitable the distribution of profits will be, among different tribes in a given state. So, there are going to be things for legislators and regulators to continue to consider as we refine the framework that we operate under. But we're dealing with 1988 tools in a 2020 landscape, and there are just inherent challenges with that.
Well, I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. So,
yeah.
So, we've got just a few more minutes left, and I'm just going to throw this out because I was on a panel last week, and Kevin Smith threw it out at me. So, looking in your crystal ball, what's the next state that goes legal in the tribal world? Kevin? Oh, I'm sorry, Kevin. Marcus? Sorry.
That's a tough one. I might go with Arizona, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Vic?
So if we're talking about a state passing legislation, Arizona has a good pass, but or a good chance. I would say that in terms of no state legislation, but a tribe moving forward, I have a good feeling it's going to be North Dakota.
There you go. Brian?
I don't know. I mean, crystal ball, woman in a cave type stuff here. I definitely see a path in Arizona. I see, potentially Louisiana. There could be some tribes coming on. New York's an interesting one from a legislation being passed perspective. Obviously, there's tribes there that are already operating, but you've got commercial considerations in New York. But honestly, every time I feel like we're close in some of these states, I get a curveball. So despite the fact that my background is in predictive modeling, I had a loss here to give. Like, I don't want anybody to be making bets on Bovada right now about what state's coming on based on what I say. That's for sure.
Conrad, who do you think is going to come up first?
I'd take an over/under bet. I'm going to go with Arizona. I think the things are better lined up there. Louisiana, I think, has since I worked in that jurisdiction, has a lot of the compacts there are not easy to amend, and then you still have, what it's going to happen on the commercial side. But Vic, I mean, yeah, North Dakota could do it tomorrow, just as New Mexico could, the way their compacts are structured. So, so I'm taking Arizona and the points.
There you go. Jonathan?
It's an interesting question, and having grown up much of my life in Arizona, I got to go with the emotional choice in Arizona. But one interesting thing about Arizona, Arizona was a leader in kind of this creative model for non-gaming tribes to at least benefit through leasing provisions from tribes that do game, and that models like that are at least helpful to think about as we think about this first to market challenge that that we have in this new atmosphere. So I got to go with Arizona. I got to make one last little plug. And as others have pointed out, there's no right way or wrong way to run a sports book. Whether you're operating it directly or contracting with somebody else to manage your sports book. There are different models out there, but I do want to thank, and I always try to show this gratitude, Mississippi Choctaw, for allowing me to spend several days out there to kind of just learn from them in terms of the lessons learned from their efforts to manage their sports book independently. And they've done a great job. And as tribes share information, I think Mississippi Choctaw's willingness to meet with other tribal leaders and share their knowledge has been very admirable. So there are a lot of different approaches to all of this, but as tribes do their due diligence, I would suggest they talk to Mississippi Choctaw as well.
Yeah, and I'm going to go with you guys on the same thing. Being an Arizona girl, I'm going to go with Arizona first. And Jonathan, you're right. In this point in time, I think during COVID, the tribes have learned that there's no good reason to reinvent the wheel every time. So tribal sharing is at its all-time high at this point. So I want to thank gentlemen for you guys to be on my panel. Thanks SBC for letting us join you this week. And Lucy, I think we're good.
Thanks, Sheila.
Thank you, Sheila.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Sheila. Bye.
Oh, there's one Q&A.
I don't even know how to shut this off here. So.
Okay. I think Lucy does that.
Okay.
I think Lucy does, but thank you guys so much. That was fun.
Yeah, that was.
That was a lot of fun.
FYI, again, I didn't mean to be Chicken Little, but I actually have heard from different staffers that once things settled